Holy Gospel according to St. Matthew, the 2nd chapter.
Glory to you, Lord.
Now after the Magi had left, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt, and remain there until I tell you. For Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him." Then Joseph got up, took the child and his mother by night and went to Egypt, and remained there until the death of Herod. This was to fulfill what had been spoken by the Lord through the prophet, "Out of Egypt I have called my son." When Herod saw that he had been tricked by the wise men, he was infuriated, and he sent and killed all the children in and around Bethlehem who were 2 years old or under, according to the time that he had learned from the wise men. Then was fulfilled what had been spoken through the prophet Jeremiah. A voice was heard in Ramah, wailing and loud lamentation, Rachel weeping for her children. She refused to be consoled, because they are no more. When Herod died, an angel of the Lord suddenly appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel, for those who were seeking the child's life are dead." Then Joseph got up, took the child and his mother, and went to the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus was ruling over Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. And after being warned in a dream, he went away to the district of Galilee. There he made his home in a town called Nazareth, so that what had been spoken through the prophets might be fulfilled. He will be called a Nazarene. The Gospel of the Lord.
So, like most people, I hope to have a little bit of downtime in these days between Christmas and New Year's. And while this does not always happen, it's usually at least possible to have a little bit more relaxed routine. Because even if I'm not on vacation, you may experience this also, even if you are not personally on vacation, everybody else is. So nobody really expects any work to get done. So at least you can get a little bit of a break from the routine. Because after all the stress and the anxiety of getting ready for Christmas is over. But the decorations are still up. The music sometimes still lingers in the air. If you come to church, we're still singing the Christmas carols, and you can still play the Christmas songs on your playlist in your car. And there's still this sort of feeling that somehow or other there should be some peace and quiet in these days. Maybe now we can get a little peace and quiet. Maybe. But to be proactive in feeling like I'm getting a little bit of a break, either at this time or at any other time of the year, I really try not to spend very much time looking at my newsfeed. I know that there are lots of bad and horrible things happening around me and in the world, and that it does not take a break for Christmas. And it's not that I don't care, and it's not that I don't think it's important to be informed. It's just that every once in a while, I need a break from it. And at least for a few days, I do not want to get all wrapped up in impeachment or Brexit or whatever other political intrigue is going on in the world around me. At least for a few days, I do not want to get wrapped up in the latest moral outrage or miscarriage of justice, of which there are many, no matter what time of the year it is. At least for a few days, I don't want to get all wrapped up in all of the horror stories of people who died tragic and cruel deaths in these days which are supposed to be filled with light and life. During these days between Christmas and New Year's, I'd like to avoid these things as much as possible. But Matthew's Gospel comes along, and his story of Christmas won't let me do that, even if I turn off my newsfeed. Today's Gospel is the final piece of Matthew's birth narrative. In fact, Matthew doesn't really narrate the birth of Jesus. He simply says that Jesus was born, and after that, Joseph named him Jesus, as the angel had commanded him in the dream. And then, after maybe 2 years, these magi show up. These people we call the wise men, the kings, or whatever they are. They're pagan astrologers from the east who have seen this star in the sky, and somehow that means to them that a king has been born. And so they travel east, looking for who it is that happened to have been born, and they arrive in Jerusalem, and they ask King Herod, "Hey, where is this newborn king, whose star we saw at its rising?"
And it's at that point that the story takes a decidedly dark turn. The rest of the story includes all of the familiar stuff that I want to take a break from. The story includes political intrigue, as Herod plots with both political and religious leaders to figure out where this Messiah is. And it's interesting that Herod understands this to mean this is the Messiah the people have been waiting for, but Herod plots with his political and religious leaders to try to find a way to snuff him out. He wants to kill him. The rest of this story is filled with a story of the horrible murder of children, as the Magi, having been warned in a dream, don't go back to Herod. And so Herod, in a rage, decides, you know what? It's better to kill everybody than to take a chance, and goes off and kills a bunch of people. The story is filled, at the end, with the story of Mary and Joseph and Jesus having to flee twice for their lives. Not unlike all the stories of refugees that I have to read if I open my news feeds. That is the Christmas story as told by Matthew. No wonder most of us prefer Luke. And yet, as much as I viscerally don't like it, there is something powerfully important about Matthew presenting Jesus as God with us, who comes into our real world with its real problems and its real evil. Matthew makes it clear that God shares with us our real lives, the real lives that we actually live, and the real situations that we actually face. In Jesus, God becomes one of us and walks with us through it all. But this story is more than that. If God was simply concerned about walking with us through political intrigue, murder, and injustice, then the good news would simply be that misery loves company, and God is there with you as things are just going horribly in your life. And while that's a piece of it, the story is more than that. Because Matthew's Christmas story is just the beginning of the story. And indeed, the political intrigue, murder, and injustice in this story foreshadow more to come in Jesus' life. But as the story ends, none of those things have the final word. By the end of Matthew's gospel narrative, Jesus has become God with us, who has been the victim of political and religious intrigue, which has killed him. But now, he stands on the mountain with the disciples and says that all authority has been given to him by God. The authority of the rulers, the principalities, the forces of darkness, none of those things finally have won. In the end, God is winning. And although it doesn't seem like anything has changed at the moment, Jesus' resurrection is the sign that the powers of evil and darkness don't get the last word. By the end of Matthew's gospel narrative, Jesus has been shown as God with us, who has been murdered himself, but risen from the dead. Even murder and death don't get the last word. Life wins for Jesus, and through him, life is promised to all of us, no matter what happens to any of us. By the end of Matthew's gospel, Jesus has been shown to be God with us, who has been cast out, physically, literally, and thrown in a tomb, but now, in the end, is risen from the dead and sends the disciples to make disciples, more disciples of all nations. That is, everybody now gets invited into God's kingdom. And in the fullness of God's kingdom, nobody ever has to flee or run away again. See, it doesn't seem like God is going to win from the beginning of the story. And sometimes in the world around us, it doesn't seem like God is winning now. But those who experience Jesus experience God with us. Those who experience Jesus experience the power and reality of the resurrection. Those who experience Jesus saw the coming reign of God's victory in spite of the political intrigue, the death, and the injustice that surround him. That is the perspective of faith that Matthew's story of Jesus shares with us. And Matthew's story continues to invite us into that perspective of faith by inviting us to experience Jesus more deeply through word and sacrament. Matthew's story of Jesus continues to invite us into that perspective of faith by inviting us to experience Jesus more deeply through the community of disciples that Jesus calls us to be a part of. And Matthew's story of Jesus continues to invite us into that perspective of faith, not by turning off our news feeds, but rather by seeing God at work in our own lives and in the world around us, even in the midst of the darkness and the chaos that often seem to still surround us.